Welcome to Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth. Gary Helt is excited to bring you another powerful conversation to help you grow and protect your business and finances. Today's episode is hosted by a special guest, personally selected by Gary, so you can keep learning and moving forward even when Gary is off the mic. Settle in and enjoy today's insights.
Welcome back to Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth. I'm your guest host, Jack Reeder, and today I'm joined by business valuation and forensic accounting expert, Bethany Hearn. Welcome, Bethany.
Thank you, Jack.
Bethany Hearn is a CPA accredited in business valuation and certified in financial forensics with more than 30 years experience in public accounting. She specializes in business valuation, litigation support, and transaction services for privately held companies, helping owners understand value, manage risk, and plan for transitions. Bethany has served as an expert witness in shareholder disputes and marital dissolutions and has held multiple national leadership roles with the AICPA. She was named AICPA Business Valuation Volunteer in 2018. So great to have you on the podcast, Bethany.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's start out by going into the Wayback Machine. How did you get started as a CPA and how did you get to your current position?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. I actually was a math major when I first started college. And then I did a internship where my father-in-law worked, and he was a CFO. So I got a little bit of experience in that accounting world, and I was really intrigued. And I'm like, wow, this is a way that I could not only use my math skills, but also my creative skills, and writing skills in doing something a little bit different. So I switched from math to accounting. And when I graduated, I started as an auditor at one of the big four firms in Chicago. So let's see, after that, I was there for about 3 years. And at the time, I loved it. And I'm like, I am here to stay. I'm going to fast track to partner. This is going to be great. And then 3 years in, something happened called a baby. And I no longer wanted to commute over 2 hours each day to work. So I looked for a different opportunity that was closer to home and that allowed me a little bit more flexibility in hours. So I left the Big Four and went to a small privately held, a small CPA firm that was closer to home. One of the things that I really loved about that particular path going from Big Four and audit to a smaller firm. When I went to the smaller firm, I did everything. I did bookkeeping for clients, I did tax preparation, compilations, and even some reviews. We didn't do very many audits there. So I really got to see a bigger picture of business owners. And through that experience, I really found that I love working with owners of privately held businesses. And the reason is they're passionate about their business, they're passionate about their employees, they're passionate about their customers, and they're passionate about their communities. And those things are just really important to me.
Sounds great. And then so you're, in terms of business valuation and your current practice, how did you get into that, specializing in that?
Yeah, so I continued to do the tax and write-up work for a couple years and then moved solely into tax at another firm. And it was at that firm that I was attending a training. It was a couple-day seminar on estate and gift taxation. And one of the topics that they talked about for a couple hours was business valuations and how important they are in the gift tax and estate tax arena. Well, that really piqued my interest. And so I started talking about getting involved in that specialty. And it took about a year for a position to open at the firm I was in. But as soon as it opened, I jumped in and I have never looked back. And that was over 25 years ago. So,
Great. Um, and then moving from the last firm, which you told me was a pretty big firm,
yes.
uh, to where you are now. Tell me about that decision.
So I was with a big, one of the top 10 CPA firms for a little over 18 years. I led their valuation and forensic practice. Um, and, just as things were growing and, the firm was focusing on certain aspects of growth, it became evident to me that it wasn't the best fit for me anymore. I love what I do. And I was no longer loving what I was doing. So I happened to meet with the managing partner of the firm I'm at now, which is MH. And I had an opportunity for him. I was going to refer a client to him, and he was going to refer a client to me. So we met over coffee. And he ended the meeting by saying, "Hey, if you're ever tired of where you're at, give me a call because we may want to start that service line at my firm." And every night for 4 weeks, when I would go to bed, I started dreaming about what I would do. Okay, so I would do it this way, I would set it up this way, I would do this and that. And after 4 weeks, I'm like, if this is what I am dreaming about, I really need to take the step and make the move. And so I did. And
That's a great
it's
story.
yeah, it's been great too. So I still love it.
That's great. Um, so thinking about business owners, um, I would say that many of them might assume, well, valuations only matter, when I'm thinking about selling. Uh, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I hear that all the time. But if you want to wait until you're going to sell your business, the value that you want to get out of it may not be there. You have to plan for it all along. And it takes time. You can't just say, I want to sell my business in a year. How can I maximize the value? We have to start much earlier in the process. There's this one business owner I worked with, and he had an amazing philosophy of, he said, every day he operates his business as if he's going to sell it tomorrow. And now, not everybody's going to do that, but you at least want to start 5 years ahead of time.
Mhm.
The longer you start the process of understanding the value of your business and what the future potential value might be, the more opportunity you have to create that value.
And I guess you never know when you might get an unsolicited call that says, "Hey, are you interested in selling your business?"
Right. I mean, I hear from clients all the time that they get these calls pretty regularly. There are buyers out there. But it's really important for the business owner to identify what are they looking for. Are they looking for the top cash price, or are they looking to preserve the legacy that they created in their business and the culture they created? Those are really important considerations because they're different. You can get top price, but you may not be able to preserve the legacy and culture. So, business owners have to decide what is more important to them.
And that goes right back to one of the things you said that you loved about working with business owners, that they're passionate about their employees and their community, it's not just about money.
Correct. And oftentimes that's what I find when we get down to it and we start talking about, okay, this potential buyer could offer you more money, um, but let's look at what's going to happen after the sale. And one conversation recently was there's a buyer out there that's been buying up a few different companies that are similar to my client and paying a really good price for them, right? And I said, well, we could always go to them and see if they're interested. He said, well, before you go to them, I recommend you talk with one of owners from one of the companies that sold. And they knew a couple of them. That's how they knew about these transactions. And said, talk to them, find out how it's going. What are the good things that have happened since the transaction and what are the not so good things? And they learned that, one of the issues was the hours and the stress of the expectations.
So Bethany, we've been talking about business valuation sort of for the purpose of either selling or of eventually selling. What are some other reasons that business owners come to you or are seeking a valuation?
Oftentimes it has to do with a succession planning or estate planning. So a business owner may want to move wealth out of their estate by gifting ownership in their company to the next generation. It could also be that they want to sell some stock or do some stock compensation for key executives at the company to retain them and motivate them. Because if they have some kind of stake in the company, they may be more apt to grow the company more, right? And make it more profitable. So those are a couple of the reasons. Those are the good reasons. Some of
That was going to
the
be my next question.
the not so good reasons.
Yeah.
Um, the not so good reasons tend to come about due to disagreement. That could be disagreement with a spouse, disagreement with a business partner, disagreement with a somebody they're contracting with, whether it's a customer or a vendor. And those are going, those end up in that kind of litigation setting. So it's not quite as favorable to be doing the valuations. They tend to be very stressful times for the business owner. But again, we can help them through that. The better thing, though, would be to let's talk ahead of time and help avoid those kinds of situations. And what can a business owner do to do that? So those are conversations I like to have.
Okay. Um, Now, talk a little bit about, how forensic accounting uh, is not just used for business valuation purposes, but can also help a business owner to uncover or, uh, you know, uh, become aware of risks that they may not be aware of.
Yes, so forensic accounting, we can look at the transaction data, we can look at the systems and processes that are in place to identify weaknesses. And that could be a control weakness where maybe they have one person that does everything. They write the checks, they balance the checkbook, they record the transactions, they issue invoices, maybe they're even in charge of payroll. That's a big risk. You have one person that's doing all of that. And it's a risk from multiple aspects, right? It's not just the financial risk that that person has access to all these assets and has the ability to manipulate those assets, but it's also a risk that if something happened to that person, there's no backfill. There's nobody else who knows what they're doing. There's nobody else involved in the process. So there's nobody else that can step in seamlessly and take over for that person. And we all know that, accidents happen, illness happens. There are things that happen in our lives that can disrupt our ability to do our work, to do our job. So we always need to have that somebody else who can step in. Maybe they can't do it perfectly, but they at least know enough to be able to cover those tasks while the person is out.
Yeah, or they could have been lured to another company and be moving on.
That's true. Yes, they could leave. Yes. So no employees are forever, right?
So you
You may
need to
think
have
they are, but
someone on the bench.
you do. Yes. Definitely spreading out those responsibilities is helpful. And on that kind of the cash side, the banks, the payroll, the vendors, you want to be able to distribute those responsibilities to avoid any manipulation. In one case, somebody was responsible for paying bills, and what they ended up doing is they took invoices that were for a different company and had this company, the company they were employed by, pay those invoices. So the company was paying invoices for materials and supplies that they weren't even using. Another company was benefiting from that. So you want to be able to avoid those kinds of things by having multiple people involved in the process.
Good advice. So thinking about your experience serving as an expert witness, what would you say to a business owner who is thinking, oh no, I think there could be some kind of a dispute here, or maybe they got a letter, or you know, um, what would be the things that they should be most concerned about initially, as soon as they know that that there may be some litigation?
The first thing is they need a good lawyer, and they need a good expert. So bringing an expert along early is very beneficial. The expert may not end up doing much work at all. They just may be consulting and, you know, there to understand the circumstances, maybe to give some advice as the case moves along. But having them involved early is beneficial because then if they need to do work, they've been involved in the case and they're familiar with all aspects of the case from the starting point. Bringing an expert in later there can be some disruption there. The expert needs to get up to speed. There may be things that, the attorneys know everything that's going on. The business owner knows. But communicating all of that to the expert can be challenging. And so having them involved early I would definitely recommend that.
And then in terms of different industries, I'm not sure if you specialize in a particular industry or several industries, but how would valuation challenges differ in different industries? For example, construction versus manufacturing or farming.
So the difference is what maybe a buyer might be focused on. So like in the restaurant industry, a lot of buyers are focusing on revenue multiples. Whereas in manufacturing, they're going to be looking at more from a cash flow perspective. And manufacturing and construction and ag, actually, all three of those are capital intensive, or can be, depending on what aspect of construction we're talking about. But the capital intensity is important when you're looking at how to value the company. If you pick, let's say, a revenue multiple, and you're focusing at a high level, you may be missing the capital expenditure requirements for that particular business. So it's really important to be looking at cash flow and how the company is managing those capital expenditure needs.
Let's talk about differences between valuation reports. If let's say three different experts do a valuation report, I would assume they don't typically come out at exactly or even necessarily very close to the same valuation. What causes, major differences in valuation reports when that happens?
There's a couple reasons why that could happen. One is access to information. So in one case I was involved in, there were certain documents that were provided to one side, but were not provided to us. Had I had those documents, it would have impacted my value conclusion. So it could be a document issue. It could be misrepresentation. Maybe the parties want a certain value, so they're telling you a story that supports the value that they're trying to get at. And as an expert, we have to sift through that and try to be as objective as we can. Now, that objectivity is another area that causes differences in value sometimes, where unfortunately, there are folks out there that you could hire to get whatever value you want. So I want a high value, so I'm going to hire this expert because I know that they're going to kind of do what I want and give me that higher value. We call them hired guns. And unfortunately, there are some out there. Now, another reason is poorly performed and poorly executed valuations, mistakes. And unfortunately, we see that too. In fact, in one case, I didn't even testify because the judge said, after hearing the opposing expert and the cross-examination, the judge said, I don't need to hear anymore. The only value that's good is the one that we got from Bethany. So they threw out the other expert's value because it was so unreasonable. There were so many errors in the execution of the methodology.
So, for a business owner, let's say listening right now, who, after hearing what you've had to say, is thinking, boy, there's an awful lot I need to do. What would be kind of the first step, or what would you recommend for someone who feels like they really have a lot to do and they haven't done much in this area? Where do they start?
So they can start, if we want to talk about avoiding some litigation risk, one of the things they could do is start with their buy-sell agreement. It tends to be an agreement that was drafted when they drafted their articles of incorporation. They drafted some kind of buy-sell agreement, operating agreement, partnership agreement, something like that. Well, what happens with the articles of incorporation and bylaws, they're put in a drawer or in a virtual filing system. The same thing happens with that agreement. Now, that agreement contains provisions for stock transactions. Could be a change of employment. Like you mentioned before, somebody goes somewhere else. Well, if they own stock in that company and they leave and goes to a different company, what is the process for buying that stock? And how does it work? And is it reasonable? So understanding the terms of that buy-sell agreement are really important when we're looking at avoiding any kind of shareholder dispute risk. We often find that those agreements are poorly drafted. They don't define the value or how to calculate that value. They may have a formula that says, let's say, 4 times earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation, period. Well, there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made to make that correct. And then what is the 4 from? What oftentimes business owners don't understand is that in a market multiple, which that 4 times EBITDA would be, in that market multiple are hidden factors like growth and risk. So if a company is growing, growing quickly, the multiple is going to be higher. If the company is stable and just growing at a slow rate, the multiple is going to be lower. Risk factors include customer concentration. If there's a customer concentration risk, that will drive down the multiple. Another aspect of risk that would drive down the multiple is, let's say the company's only been operating for 2 or 3 years and just showed a profit last year. That's a significant risk, and a buyer is going to reduce that multiple accordingly. So those are some things that a business owner should keep in mind relative to the shareholder agreement. What's in it? Is it relevant today? Have the terms in how the valuation should be addressed, are those thoroughly defined in the buy-sell agreement? Those are all factors that we look at, and unfortunately, when they're not done well, we can often end in litigation.
So speaking of those agreements, if you were a lawyer and you were writing such an agreement when a company is, let's say, doing it for the first time, would you recommend saying something like the valuation will be based on a valuation done by a valuation expert as opposed to some formula? or multiple valuations, maybe three, the highest of three, or some kind of language like that.
If you think about the cost benefit here, if you have three different valuation folks that you are paying to do the valuation to come up with a number for the transaction, that's a lot of expense. It's a lot of time, energy, and effort that on behalf of the business owner and their team, because they're going to have to work with each one of those experts. The better way would be to have a valuation done up front before the agreement is completed. So here are the terms of the agreement that we're looking at. Are we looking at discounts for lack of control, lack of marketability? How would that be applied? How does the tax structure of the entity impact the valuation? So it's better to engage with the party upfront to do what we call like a test valuation. So let's do the valuation according to the draft terms of the agreement, and then let's talk about it. Is this what you expected? Is this do you agree with this approach and these discounts, and how does that all fit together? And if we can get everybody, all the shareholders aligned with that initial valuation and how it was applied, that actually can be part of the shareholder agreement and say, this is the methodology. Obviously, the numbers change, risk and growth change over time, but the high level assumptions would stay the same, like how to apply a discount for lack of control or lack of marketability. And that way, that when you get to that point where there's a trigger, whether it's a change of employment, death, disability, the shareholders know how that value is going to be determined. There aren't any surprises. If you draft the agreement and then wait until it's triggered to have a valuation done, that's where you end up with the surprises. And as the shareholders are working on that agreement, one of the things they need to keep in mind is they could be the seller or they could be the buyer. The seller always wants a higher price, the buyer wants a lower price. So if they go into those discussions and analysis with that thought process in mind, well, I could be the seller. I like that number if I'm the seller, but I don't really like that number if I'm the buyer. It really helps to open those conversations and really come to some resolution.
That sounds like a good way to look at it. Um, you know, Bethany, I would say that we could, this is an interesting topic to me, and I'm sure we could go on and talk about it for quite a while, but we also have some time constraints. So I just want to ask you one more question, and that is there anything we haven't talked about or anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to add to our conversation as a kind of a closing uh, comment?
Yes. So we talked about those shareholder agreements. There's one other area of litigation that I get involved in pretty regularly that I think business owners could avoid. And that has to do with farming activities. So oftentimes with farming activities, you have multi-generational owners. You may end up with, you're working with cousins and maybe second cousins. And as the ownership of the farming activities move from the first and second and third generations and keep moving down, what happens is you open the door for disagreements. Oftentimes, the terms of what I'll call it a contract. I mean, it is a contract, but they're verbal. There's nothing written down. And so as things change over time and different people are operating those agreements, they can be applied in different ways. So it's really important to have those contracts in writing. And one of the contracts is a crop sharing agreement. So if you're farming a relative's acres and you don't have a written crop sharing agreement, that is an open door to litigation because it's just so easy to miss the proper allocations of the grain and the expenses. Other contracts in that scenario that need to be identified and documented are any kind of equipment sharing arrangements or use of a grain bin or trucking. Those are all things that I've seen where one party all of a sudden says, so let's say, Jack, you and I are relatives and you're farming and I'm farming, but I own the equipment and you're using my equipment and I'm using your grain bin. But I don't think I'm getting the value out of the grain bin that you're getting out of my equipment. Well, that doesn't sound like we're getting along anymore. So I just highly recommend that farmers really pay attention to those agreements and anything that's verbal and not thoroughly documented, that they work with an attorney and the parties involved to get the agreement in writing. It'll save them time, money, and emotional distress in the long run.
Great. I'm glad you added that. So thank you, Bethany, for joining me on the podcast today. Great talking with you.
Well, thank you, Jack, for inviting me. This is, as you know, I could talk about this stuff forever because I really love what I do and working with business owners. So thank you.
I can tell. But thanks for breaking it down and helping us to understand it better. Understanding valuation, risk, transition planning clearly goes far beyond just I decided to sell my business or somebody called me and wants to buy my business. For business owners listening, today's conversation is a reminder that knowing your numbers is about protection, preparation, and making smarter decisions. Thanks for tuning in to Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth. I'm Jack Reeder, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Security products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA, SIPC. The Bullfinch Group is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS. This firm is an agency of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Life insurance offered through the Bullfinch Group Insurance Agency, LLC, an affiliate of the Bullfinch Group, LLC. The Bullfinch Group, LLC is not licensed to sell insurance. California Insurance License Number OF 11617. Links to external sites are provided for your convenience in locating related information and services. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees expressly disclaim any responsibility for and do not maintain, control, recommend, or endorse third-party sites, organizations, products, or services, and make no representation as to the completeness, suitability, or quality thereof. 2024-169104, expiration 2/26.